Hey everyone, welcome back to the Going Disparate with Pam and Mara podcast. I am one of your hosts, Pam Rogers.
And I'm the other host, Mara Dolan. I'm the Democrat and she's the Republican.
You got that straight, sister. I am the Republican.
This is going to be a really interesting show. We have a longtime Globe columnist and first time novelist, Scott Lehigh, joining us. But before we get to that, just want to remind folks you can subscribe to Going Disparate, Politics and Crime with Pam and Mara on all your podcast platforms. You've obviously found us, but help others to find us by subscribing and giving us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Going Disparate. And you can email us. Let us know what you think at pamandmara@gmail.com. So Pam, obviously, the biggest political and criminal story this week is the Trump indictment. We're going to talk about that a lot with Scott Lehigh, but there's another really interesting case where you've got some expertise. Can you tell us about this new case that's happening in Boston with Matthew Nylo and the latest?
Yeah, really interesting story. I think he was arraigned a week or two ago. A gentleman named Matthew Nylo, who grew up in Boston's North End, is currently a practicing attorney in the state of New Jersey. He's about 35 years old, I believe. Has been charged with several counts of rape that date back to 2007 and 2008. They were unsolved rapes. They went unsolved for obviously many years until Boston police received a grant for their cold case unit. And through the use of genetic genealogy, they were able to basically come up with a suspect, and his name is Matthew Nylo, and he has been arraigned. His bail was set at $500,000. I believe he is going to post it if he hasn't posted it already. But genetic genealogy, which we hear so much about, is a massive part of this case.
No, it's incredible. They apparently got his DNA from a water glass that he used when he was at a conference. And Pam, I know you study forensic genealogy, and tell us quickly what that is and how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I do study it because I try to stay up to date on a lot of the like the new cutting edge stuff that happens in criminal defense and criminal law. So forensic investigative genealogy, genetic genealogy, is like the use of forensic science because you have a DNA sample, number one. Then you couple that with genetic genealogy, meaning you upload that DNA sample to some form of a database. And then, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but then you use traditional genealogy to build out a tree so that you can basically come up with a few suspects, and the genetic genealogist then presents these few suspects to the police for them to then follow up on. You know, a genetic genealogist doesn't go through all of this work and then say, this is it, he's the guy, 100%, this is him. All it really does is come up with a suspect or more than one suspect, probably within the same family, that they pass along to the police. But the really interesting thing is, number one, and you know this, anytime police get a DNA sample, it is uploaded to the FBI's CODIS database, which is the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. That is a law enforcement system only. So in this particular case, they had uploaded the DNA sample and it did not match anyone, meaning Matthew Nylo had never been convicted of a felony before, or maybe had never been arrested. So in Massachusetts, you have to give a DNA sample if you have been convicted of a felony. But in other states in America, even if you're charged with a crime, they'll take a DNA sample from you and it's uploaded. We obviously do not have that in Massachusetts. But the Boston police uploaded that sample into CODIS and they did not come up with a match. So with this new grant, and obviously 15, 16 years later, and the development of this new science, they have basically found a suspect. So essentially, I know most people, when I talk to
Hang on, folks. Your Zoom froze for a sec, Pam. You were saying essentially?
Essentially, people will come to me and say, you know, I put my DNA in Ancestry, and then they worry, you know, is law enforcement going to be able to see my DNA sample? Law enforcement in America is not allowed to look at Ancestry DNA or 23andMe. So law enforcement is only allowed to use family tree DNA, which is not that popular in the United States, as well as GEDmatch, which is GED match, where people can upload their raw DNA data. And users of family tree as well as GEDmatch have to opt in to allow law enforcement to look at their sample. So again, who knows how long it took the genetic genealogist to come up with this person or persons. I don't know. It could be 10 hours. It could be 1,000 hours. You never quite know
Wow.
what it is.
That's amazing. I know they had the Boston police had a $2.5 million grant to investigate cold cases. And in this particular case, there were allegations of 4 rapes. They all had the same pattern. So I'm guessing that the investigators thought it may be the same perpetrator, and that made that worthwhile. And of course, he's innocent until proven guilty, as all defendants are. But you can't help but think about what this must mean to the victims. I know some of them have spoken to the Boston Globe about how they feel about the fact that this guy was caught. I mean, he had just disappeared. So to give them that closure.
Haven't read anything about this, but I would suspect that police departments in any area where this gentleman has lived since 2007, 2008 are taking a look at some of their old rape cases that have gone unsolved. It would not surprise me.
They must be. They must be. So
again,
we will be following this case. This is a really, really interesting case. But we've got Scott Lehigh now. So let's bring him on in. Here he comes. Maybe not quite yet.
All right.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm great. We can see your name, Lehigh at Global. We can't see your face. And for our YouTube viewers,
Oh God, that's not good.
Lost.
Hang on, start video. Let's do that. Start video.
It's all good.
No.
It's all good, Scott Lehigh.
Oh, I had it for a second there.
That's all right. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce you while you figure this out. Folks, we are being joined by Scott Lehigh. He's a columnist for the Globe Opinion section. He has held several editorial positions there and served on their political reporting staff. He has also just published his first novel. It's called Just East of Nowhere. And we're really glad that you're joining us today, Scott.
Well, I think I've appeared here, haven't I?
You're here, and I see some lovely paintings in the background. Who might that artist be?
Oh, look at this. This is my wife, Marcia Crumley.
It's beautiful.
And her work is findable on Instagram and Facebook. Her last name is Crumley, Crumley, Art of Marcia Crumley. She's a what does she call it? A expressionist landscape, in other words, kind of interpreted landscape painter. Yeah,
very nice. I've seen a number of her pieces on your social media, Scott, and I always
much more successful than I am. She took me on a nice cruise up the Rhine River based on her artistic earnings in the earlier in the spring. Yeah.
Well, you're not doing too badly yourself, Scott, but
I know I'm not doing that well. She makes more than a couple paintings, and I'll probably earn from Just
East of Nowhere.
Nowhere.
We're going to get to that, but I just have to tell you before we begin, I'm a Democrat. Pam Rogers, my wonderful, talented, incredibly articulate, and brilliantly smart co-host. She doesn't read the Globe. She's a little skeptical when I said, let's get Globe columnist Scott Lehigh on. So why don't you guys hash that out?
Oh, my word. Well, Pam, you're not the only one I know who says that. I don't read the Globe. But I would say two things. Well, tell me why you don't read the Globe. Rather than just me talk, you tell me why, and I'll address your issues.
Okay, so number one.
Yeah.
We can have you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
I am not a newspaper reader currently.
Okay.
10, 20, 30 years ago, right? Always.
Yeah.
But I don't read newspapers now. However, if I do read a newspaper, it's the Herald.
Uh-huh.
I feel that, now again, I don't read every article, right? I mean, I'm I like reading Howie Carr pretty much, right? And maybe
Yeah.
a news story. But I've always felt at this point in time that the Herald is more right leaning, and to me, the Globe is more left leaning. But
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah.
I looked at the Globe in literally, I don't know, 15 years. So I could be totally wrong at this point in time, but
Yeah.
that was my impression.
Well, I mean, the Globe. Yeah, there's obviously a distinction between we call it inside. We kind of call it church and state, which is opinion and news, and but also the more traditionally called news and views. I work for the opinion section. I mean, a lot of we cover the news and break a lot of stories. In fact, a lot of stories that Howie comments on because they will reinforce his point of view on different things about government excess or scandals or this or that and the other. But there's no doubt that the Globe, our views, our opinion pages lean left. Although I will say, we endorsed Bill Weld, we endorsed Charlie Baker twice for governor. We certainly have been very open to the embrace of a certain kind of moderate republicanism, particularly on the state level. And we would not be in favor of national republicanism just because it's antithetical to a lot of things that the page believes in, like gay rights, choice, frankly, this day and age, a little bit fiscal discipline. We don't believe, say, that tax cuts pay for themselves, which is a kind of a totemistic but false belief, I think, on the right. But so there is I would say there's quite a significant distinction between our views on, we were strongly in Charlie's camp, but not in the Jim Lyons camp, for which was sort of the local Trumpism part of Massachusetts republicanism. So I don't know if that allays your concerns at all, but
do whatever you want. But yeah, I think that, and whenever I talk to someone from Massachusetts on this podcast, they always say the same thing, like, but we love Charlie Baker, or Bill Weld, and I'm like, that's great, and I'm sure they're wonderful people, but like, I don't think I would really consider them a strong Republican, as you just said. Like, they're really a super moderate. Right, like Charlie Baker would never get elected in New Hampshire, right? They just wouldn't happen.
Well, Chris Sununu isn't really that much different from Charlie Baker. I mean, he's a little fuzzier on some things, but yeah, we certainly. I think Chris Sununu would have been a good presidential candidate personally, and he's a kind of But there's a huge difference between people who have to govern and make the tough day-to-day decisions and the practicality that imposes on them, and people who are advocates and ideologues. And you see that on both the left and the right. I mean, we have members in our delegation who are so far left that they would never be, to my mind, practical as a president or governor. But so does the right. I mean, a lot of the stuff that some of these guys talk about is just essentially a practical impossibility, I would say. But anyway.
Well, just for the record, I read both the Globe and the Herald, though I probably read more of the Globe than I read the Herald. I read Howie Carr, I read Joe Battenfeld, I occasionally read Peter Lucas. He's just gotten so far to the right, I can't.
Well, Peter is great, though. He's 89 years old and he's writing 3 columns a week. Can I say? And Joe Batts is a great guy. Does a very good job. I mean, Howie. I have this problem with Howie. Just think if we at the Globe had sucked up to a murderer to write a biography about him and taken all kinds of money for it. Think of what people would have said. And yet, Howie sort of gets a pass on it. He writes that Monterey's a pretty good guy or something like that, and his people never seem to process that contradiction. That here's a guy. I mean, they all say, "Well, you at the Globe, you're advocates, you're not journalists." Howie goes up on stage and has Donald Trump, appears at his rallies and endorse the whole. I think everyone is kind of coming around to admit that it's utter nonsense, stolen election crap. I mean, that's not. I mean, you can say, okay, that's just Howie being a conservative, but it really it's Trump swabbery in my mind. It's not. I mean, a real journalist would say, "Look, that's just ridiculous. I supported this guy, but all the stolen nonsense, the stolen election stuff is just ridiculous. Time to let it go." But he doesn't say that. He just kind of he plays to that audience because it's his talk radio audience.
Well, I may get in trouble for saying this, but my view of Howie Carr is that when he is good, he is very, very good. And he is occasionally very, very good. But when he is bad, he is horrid.
Yeah, well, but Howie is a very smart guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he's very capable.
Yes.
And back in the day, he used to write for Boston Magazine, long form political pieces, and they were brilliant. They were funny. They were great. But I feel like he's always kind of gone for people for one reason or another, like Dapper O'Neill or Donald Trump, who if he had more intellectual integrity, I think he wouldn't do that. But even as he criticizes other people for this, that, and the other, he is able to rationalize his own, I would say, sucking up to people who clearly aren't much for public figures. But I can say Peter Lucas, I like Peter's column because I mean he's kind of about the whole Trump thing, but he's a voice from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And some of the history he does is really quite interesting. Yes. I consider Peter quite a good friend. I mean, we, not social friend, but see him at the State House and
oh yeah, if I see Peter, I'll always, have a conversation with him. It's always a good conversation. Yeah.
But the problem with a lot of these people is they got into defending Trump. And when you get into defending Trump, you just get sucked further and further and further along. And it gets harder and harder to say, hey, you know what? I was wrong. I was wrong about this guy. This guy is a disaster. And credit some people. Bill Barr said it this weekend again.
He did.
I admire that.
He said it on Fox.
Yes, said it on Fox. That's intellectual integrity. We're realizing that and making the differentiation between the sort of nonsense that circulates in the MAGA world and the kind of thing that Jim Jordan says and what's true legally and from a jurisprudential point of view.
Well, this is going to be a really interesting discussion because obviously this podcast is called Politics and Crime with Pam and Maura. The biggest political and criminal story right now is the Trump indictment. Pam and I have actually not discussed the Trump indictment yet. So I don't even know what she thinks. But Scott, let's start with you since you're the guest. What do you think?
Well, I think I will say for the first thing you hear a lot is, and I've heard this, I correspond, I should say, Pam, with quite a few Trump people, go back and forth with them regularly on email, and in a spirited, sometimes mildly insulting, but basically collegial way. And one of the things I hear from lots of them is, how come he got indicted when Hillary didn't? And I mean, the differences there are clear. Hillary had, depending on whom you believe, just a few phrases from documents that had been classified at one point. Well, many of them after she had done it. She made no attempt to conceal or to cover that up. Trump was notified, as Bill Barr said, if he'd just given these documents back, he would not have the problem here. But here he is, he's taken to his golf club in Bedford or wherever,
New Jersey,
a DOD plan, Department of Defense plan, involving our plans if we were to attack Iran. And he's got the biographers for Mark Meadows. Why anyone will write that biography, I'll never know. But he's got them in the room, and he's sitting there saying, "Look at this. This is the essentially this is the attack plan for Iran. That's top secret." And he's riffling through it and saying, admitting it's not classified. And if you read the indictment, most of the stuff he's indicted for, it's not run-of-the-mill classified stuff. It's DOD stuff. And further, it's his blatant and willful attempt to hide, disguise what he has done, to move documents around, not to give them back. And you remember the Comey, when Jim Comey talked about why he wasn't going after Hillary, he said, "Well, there was no intent here. There was not."
Yeah, it's willful retention, as I understand it, is the issue. Willful retention, and that if he had just returned the documents, he might not have been indicted.
So I think this case, I mean, this is a case where, in my mind, Donald Trump doesn't think and has never thought that the rules that apply to other people apply to himself. And I think there are two parts to the rule of law. One is if this is something the average person would get in trouble for, a president should not be immune from getting in trouble for. But a president, countrywide, should not be prosecuted for something that an average citizen wouldn't be prosecuted for. Now, that's a hard test to apply, because an average citizen obviously would not have Defense Department documents, and would not be able to transport them around and leave them in the ballroom, the bathroom, the shower, all the different places he seemed to have been left. But I do think we could say, just from looking at the different servicemen who have done this kind of thing before, that they would be in trouble for it. And I think personally think it's a very strong indictment, and that he's going to have trouble in court with it.
Pam?
Yeah, I mean, number one, have not read the indictment. Number two, actually haven't watched a lot of news in the past week. And just to give you a little insight, Scott, so I work full time, obviously, like most of us. I don't live and breathe politics. I'm not a policy wonk. I don't read, like I said, I don't read the newspapers every day. I consume some media. I have a very, very sick husband at home, so I have a lot going. So I haven't read the indictment. I have no idea what's going to happen. I like Donald Trump. I don't agree with everything, but I like a lot of the stuff he says. Not everything. I think sometimes it gets a little crazy. I wish a lot of times he would just zip it, But I liked him when he was president. I thought he did a good job. I voted for him. I voted for him a second time. Do not plan on voting for him this time. Not quite sure who I'm going to land on yet, but I think just in general, Republicans feel that we're always the ones who are sort of being persecuted. Everyone's always coming after us or our side. And I think that is where a lot of the bad feelings occur, right? That's, Mara and I always talk about this is a place where your adversary can still be your friend, right? We want to say we totally disagree on things, but we're still friends, and that's okay. You can believe what you want, and I can believe what I want. Yep. And I think that it's when people start getting hurt, oh my gosh, that hurts me. That doesn't make me feel good. I don't like it when someone says that. And I think Republicans in general feel that, Donald Trump is being persecuted for whatever reason. I mean, I have no idea what anyone is thinking at the Department of Justice, obviously. I don't know why people on the left hate him so much. I don't totally get it, but I just feel like he's just being targeted, right? And what upsets me is I feel like in the future this sets a really bad precedent. So, right, if they prosecute Trump, which they're doing, what stops in the future? What if a Republican gets elected next? And what if they prosecute Biden, right? And then what if that person, what if we just keep switching administrations and that administration just keeps prosecuting the administration before? It doesn't make me feel good. I just don't like it. I don't like seeing that happen.
Well, I would make this point about, I hear a lot. I realize it's a very prevalent belief among Trump people that he has been uniquely targeted by the FBI and by Department of Justice. But I would point out this. My belief is that the reason Hillary Clinton lost the election in 2016 is that James Comey reopened publicly the investigation into her emails in the closing days of the campaign, because they had turned up on Anthony Weiner's computer, or one you remember that whole thing. So that was and that immediately became huge in public, and Hillary was up by about 5 points nationally, which is probably enough at that point too, where I always think of it as a river with stepping stones. You can sort of step your way through the Electoral College and win if the river's at a certain level, but if you're ahead by more than 5 points, the stepping stones disappear, and I don't think Trump would have found a path to victory. I think that knocked her down sufficiently. So I think in a way, Trump won the election. I'm not saying James Comey was in favor of Trump, because I don't believe that's true, but he wasn't targeting Trump. And we know that for this reason. The FBI at that time had opened its investigation into the Trump campaign and whether there were Trump campaign ties to Russia. If the FBI had been out to get Trump, the FBI could have leaked that news to national newspapers, and that would have been enough, I think, probably to end the Trump campaign. They didn't, but they did. They kept that secret, and yet they let it be known that they had reopened the investigation into Hillary. Not that I think they were targeting Hillary either, but the fact that the information did not become public about Trump means that all that was public was the investigation into Hillary. And I do think that probably there's a very good case to be made that that's what cost her the election. So I think that, to my mind, goes to disprove the notion that the FBI somehow was against Trump. And I think I feel like that an awful lot of this with Trump supporters sort of pass, and the myth sort of becomes fact for them because they hear it so much and it's so reinforced, and they watch it on Fox and they hear it repeated, and that's why I think a lot of them believe that the election was stolen. Absolutely preposterous, and yet it's become almost a totemistic belief among Trump supporters, and it just you watch a retreat from it. It used to be, of course, it was stolen, and now my Trump people go back and forth. Well, we'll never know if it was stolen, but I think it was, and then it's, well, they certainly changed the way you could vote because of COVID, and that had the same effect of stealing it. And the latest one is, if people had known that Hunter Biden's laptop was really Hunter Biden's laptop, then enough of them would have changed that Trump would have won. So I think they're kind of retreating from the assertion, but I do think it's. I mean, look at everyone. The Republican election officials in Georgia and in Arizona will say, no, this was a fair and legitimate. They did the cyber ninjas, that silly cyber ninjas audit of Maricopa County. That said Biden actually won more votes than they had it win before. I mean, there've been check after check after check and recount, and it always comes out Biden. There isn't really a credible allegation of result. Bill Barr says it. Trump's own people at DOJ said it. No, this election wasn't stolen. His cybersecurity chief said it. No, this election wasn't stolen.
But I do think that what Pam is talking about in terms of how Republicans feel that Trump is being treated is an important point. And I want to offer the counterpoint that Democrats think that the media has been far too easy on Trump. We don't think he's being treated badly at all. We think that a lot of the mainstream media fell all over themselves to cover Trump in 2016 because they wanted ratings, and that those old habits are hard to break, as we just saw on the CNN town hall.
Oh my God, in CNN, I mean, I fault still. I think he's a good newsman, but Jake Tapper and Wolf put Trump on. They put him on anytime they could get him on. He got millions of dollars of free publicity just because he was kind of a showman, and he is kind of funny. He's got a certain rogue charisma about him, but he got all kinds of free airtime on networks like that. And I would say this, Pam, when I think about, people talk about, hey, look, it's 2016. It was legitimate, I think, to vote for Trump if you were discontent with the state of situation. To my mind, I don't think his term was much of a success, but I realize other people do, and I suppose you could have voted for him again. Although I think characterologically, he'd kind of shown his cards. But what we saw, to my mind, on January 6th, and with the scheming, we saw someone who showed that he doesn't hold either the Constitution or the American democracy in much regard, because he's schemed.
That's what Mike Pence is saying.
Election. Yeah. And I say to all my Trump friends now, okay, guys, I understand 2016. I mean, 2020, if you really felt that way, but how do you support a guy again who would have, had he been allowed to, trample on the Constitution, would have done so?
But Scott, that's where Pam is right now. She's just said she won't vote for him again.
No, I know that.
So Pam, why won't you vote for him again?
Because it's a circus, right? And I care about actual issues. Like, I care about me and my family. Yeah. And prosecutions all over the place do not help me and my family, right? Like, I don't, this isn't a revenge tour. And I feel like he's on a revenge tour. Like, I'm going to get my revenge, right? And I'm like, listen, I care about my pocketbook, right? I care about my taxes. I care about, the economy. I care about crime. I don't really care about you being prosecuted. You've got 8 million lawyers, you're worth money. Take care of that over there to the side, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to talk with a Republican candidate that is concerned about the actual issues that are facing actual real people like me, right? Like, that's what I care about. So, yes, I voted for Trump. Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. I think you're a very nice man. I think you did a good job, but it's time to go. So I feel it's time to go. Goodbye. It's over.
From your lips to his ears.
Well, yeah,
I-
yeah. And Scott, you were mentioning Trump being sort of an entertainer. I actually think at this point that the most entertaining, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, the most entertaining Republican right now is Chris Christie.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, Chris Christie, and Chris Christie is. I mean, Trump. He got in the race to be sort of a lesser Trump, and then Trump got in and was a greater Trump, and there was no room for Chris Christie. But Chris Christie he's he's not always the most pleasant person in the world, but he's very smart.
Yep.
He's a good arguer.
Yep.
He decimated Marco Rubio in the debates, and he is
Yep.
and frankly, telling the truth, saying no, this election wasn't stolen. This guy is a disaster, and that it'll be a disaster for the. Like just saying what Chris Sununu was saying, and saying what I think a lot of Republicans think, but don't feel like they can say publicly because they don't want to get crosswise with MAGA. But I think that Chris Christie, having him out there making that case, and he makes it quite powerfully.
He does.
A sharp guy. That is going to be that's going to be a problem for Trump. Now, I don't think the hardcore MAGA people will be affected, but I think there's kind of some loosely affiliated, people who are going to listen over time and watch all this stuff. It's interesting for this reason because interesting for a number of reasons, but particularly for this one, Biden's best path to reelection, I believe, is a radioactive Trump. If Trump gets the nomination, a lot of people say, I don't like Biden, I don't like Trump. But if I have to choose between the two of them, I will choose Biden again. Obviously, far from ideal having a guy who will be 82 running for president. But you look at that and you say, okay, what if this stuff hurts Trump enough that he is not the nominee and it's Nikki Haley? Or it's Asa Hutchinson, an old style.
For people who are just listening, you couldn't see when Scott Lehigh said Nikki Haley, Pam mouthed this enormous no.
Okay. But
No.
Asa Hutchinson, old style Ronald Reagan Republican, kind of optimistic, inclusive. I mean, not a gloom and doomer about America. Someone who's a very decent guy, I think. What if one of these other candidates, because of this, becomes the nominee? Then all of a sudden you have a very different matchup. So it's kind of like if this stays at a serious level, but a level that doesn't disqualify Trump in the Republican primaries in the minds of MAGA, and he's the nominee, probably helps Biden and the Democrats. If it becomes so serious that he can't be the nominee, or he is not chosen to be the nominee, and it's someone younger and more reasonable and without his baggage, that could be very bad news for Biden. So it kind of cuts either way, I think, in terms of what the political effect is. Now, I'm not, and you watch these guys, you watch them come out and talk about it. No one will quite, or very few people. The Speaker McCarthy came out and immediately jumped to Trump's side. But a lot of the rhetoric here is kind of holding place rhetoric. I'm looking for a safe space, and they're saying something like, "I don't know why they went after him when they didn't go after Hillary or Hunter." But they're not really saying it's wrong to go after Trump. They're sort of saying, okay, here's my way of criticizing them without actually saying that.
Well,
so
and also to Pam's point, that plays into this all being about Trump and not about other issues. I'm really interested in the stuff that Mike Pence has said. Also, folks, Pam and I are thrilled Mike Pence is going to come on our podcast. So
is he really?
Oh yeah,
well, that's a good get for you guys. Wow,
it's a wonderful get. So he won't be our first presidential candidate, by the way, and he won't be our last
presidential.
We had former U.S. Rep Mike Rogers.
Oh, okay.
Potential. He's a potential.
He's a potential candidate. That's true. But we're really looking forward to having Mike Pence, and he has said, he's been very pointed on January 6th. He said Trump's reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol. And he said that anyone who puts the Constitution over themselves should never be president again. I mean, that was
That's
his
powerful
vice
stuff,
president. Have we
yeah.
ever seen a vice president say that about the person with whom they served?
Well, I mean, not since no, I would say never, and certainly not since the days when people ran as a ticket. In the old days, when when Aaron Burr wanted to be, way back in the early electoral college days, in the first few elections, you had people scheme about one another, but I would say not since the era of joined and chosen tickets. Have you seen that kind of? Although Grant obviously, well, he wasn't vice president. No, I better shut up. I'm getting into areas of history that I'm largely ignorant about. So I think you're right. It hasn't happened.
Scott, I was going to say, I met for the very first time Vice President Pence 2 weeks ago in New Hampshire at an extremely small event. And first of all, I said I was actually really surprised at how warm he was. And I've always had a good impression of Vice President Pence. I like him. But I just thought he was like a little robotic. Right? You just think,
oh God, yeah.
Someone like, oh, who's like the perfect politician, right? You would roll him out and you'd be like, he looks like the perfect politician. But he was so warm, so inviting, so kind when I was talking to him individually. It was actually, I was really, really shocked by that. And then he spoke with us, then he took questions from us. Like I said, there was probably 12 of us in the room. It was very small. But he did talk a lot about Trump, exactly kind of what Mara had just said. He did say, like, I admire him. I think he's a good person. But so I wasn't sure actually what he was going to say at all. Like, I wasn't sure if this was going to be all negative Trump or all positive Trump, but it was sort of like a half and half, right? Like that, he put my family in jeopardy on January.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Is that when you secured the commitment from him to be on your podcast?
Scott, I think you're just totally underestimating the power of this podcast. I have to.
I just was going to say that's very entrepreneurial. That's hard to do. I admire that kind of when someone gets you. You got them in a room and you say, and you get them. That's good. It's the way commitments are done. No, I don't underestimate the podcast at all. You had Corey.
You're on it.
That's a great get.
That was a good one. Yeah.
It was a good one. So we should talk about your wonderful, Scott, new novel. You have just written your first novel. It's called Just
my
East of
first
Nowhere.
published novel.
Your first published novel.
Yeah, but thank
I
you.
haven't finished it. I did start it. I want you to know I am genuinely loving it. It's a very enjoyable read, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but you just want to keep going. I love the characters. I love the way the characters are written. They're interesting people, and I want to know more. Much. I know, and I want to know more about that. And of course, the setting is incredible. So tell us a little bit about Just East of Nowhere.
Well, I want to tell you this first. So I was mentioned that my wife, Marcia Crumley, who did these wonderful paintings, took me on this riverboat cruise. And when we came back, my mother, who was 89 now, and one of my sisters had stayed here at our house to look after our cats. So then my mother normally lives with the other sister. So I'd gone to see her. And I said, so, I didn't realize that I didn't realize she had read the book because I hadn't given it to her, but I had a review copy hanging around here. And I said, so, well, Mom, have you seen any good movies? Have you, on TV, have you read any books? And she said, well, I read your novel. I said, well, that's kind of a pregnant pause moment. I said, well, what did you think? And she said, I thought it was full of violence and foul language.
Oh.
Which it really isn't. I mean, there is some violence and foul language in it, but so I think I'm going to put that on my website, full of violence and foul language.
Scott, I'm going to put that when we post the podcast. And Scott Lehigh talks about his new violence-filled novel.
No, don't. Don't, because that. But so, I forgot what the subject is. So so here it is. It's Just East of Nowhere, available, done by Islandport Press, which is a very reputable, I think, high quality, small but main publisher, not self-published. Everyone always says, "Oh, yeah, published." No, it's published by them, edited very well by them. I work with Ron Curry Jr., who's a great novelist himself, who's their fiction editor.
Nice.
And it's out there in the world trying to make its way. It sort of officially launches this month, and then shipping from other places. I think it ships from Island Port now. It ships from Amazon. I know people hate Amazon, but you got to deal with them. I don't hate them.
I want to buy it at my local bookstore.
You buy it at your local bookstore. I'm trying to get it in the Concord bookstore. I've talked to the gentleman there.
Oh, good.
And so it's it's made its way up to 832nd on the small town and rural fiction. I'm hoping to boost it up a little high. We'll see what happens. So it's a story, essentially a story of
No spoiler alerts.
Well, what?
No spoilers.
Yeah. It's a dark coming of age story. Essentially, a coming of age story is a story where people grow from into adulthood during the course of the novel. It's tracking kids at where I went to high school in Eastport, Maine, which is way removed. It's as far east as you can, northeast as you can go in the continental United States.
Wow.
And it's very remote. I moved there from upstate Idaho, from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, when I was 12, I guess. My family, I didn't move by myself. My family moved us there. It's 30 miles from the nearest traffic light.
Wow.
So it's a very isolated place. And it's an interesting little community, kind of an extraction. I mean, most kids who want to do, it's one of those things like many rural places in Maine. If you want to have a kind of a professional career, there's not much there for you, really. Now that may change with Zoom and work from a distance, but most people, a lot of kids leave. They'll go to, I think about a third of my high school class maybe went to college, maybe a little less, and 2-year or 4-year or tech school or something. And a lot of those people would leave, and it's hard to come back then, because unless you're a teacher or work at the post office, maybe 1 or 2 lawyers in town, a few bank people, but most of the population is it's older, it's fishing, it's different kinds of fishing, clamming, wreathing. So it's a very rural, remote Maine community. And the story is about a kid he's the son of a single mother who is who is a member of a religious community that's somewhere on the margin between what you would consider conventional or traditional and sort of out there, in that vast and ill-defined space between traditional and cult, and it's somewhere in there. And he's searching to find something about his father, and he discovers something about him that's quite horrible, that obsesses him and defines the way he thinks about himself. And it's a story about his search for his identity and his interaction with other kids in the community or young adults in the community who are have some issues of their own. And it's gotten fairly good. I mean, Kirkus hasn't been widely reviewed. Kirkus, which is quite critical of books, it's where publishers send their book for a review, and you pay Kirkus not per book, but you pay a fee, I think, to be a member of it, as I understand it. And then if the review comes back bad, you just don't publish it. So this review came back.
I like that system.
Yeah, exactly. Quite good. Not overwhelmingly positive, but I think it correctly identified a flaw or two in the book. But I was very pleased with that. It's gotten some nice blurbs. Caroline Shute, who wrote The Beans of Egypt, Maine, is kind of it's a seminal book in Maine realism, sort of telling stories where people as they really are, the nitty gritty, rather than kind of idealizing them. She gave it a very nice blurb. It was hard tracking her down. She's kind of off the grid in remote Maine, but she was really nice to. And I've got Richard North Patterson, who's a best-selling novelist, read it for me and really liked it. Heather McHugh. I don't know if you guys remember Heather.
No, I don't know her.
Well, she's like a genius poet. She's a Guggenheim. She lived a little while in Eastport. She's now out at the Puget Sound. I think just retired from teaching poetry at the University of Washington. So she's not. But I have a little teeny bit of a shirt tail relationship with her. from many years ago, and she read it and wrote me a what's meant to be a foreword, but it came in a little too late, about her time in Eastport, which is just a beautiful
Oh,
piece of writing, better than the book, frankly. But I'm going to publish that on my website about it.
good.
So, I'm very excited. I'm very nervous. You write something like this, and you don't know how are people going to react. Are they going to say, "Oh God," and are they going to say, "Huh"? There's a little bit of an admission that you come from an area that you're not. I mean, I never claimed to be a sophisticate, but you grew up in for the most part in a very rural kind of isolated area. And
Scott, I'm sorry that, well, I would refer you to the podcast that we did with Ray Buckley, who's the New Hampshire Democrats chair,
sure,
where
yeah, yeah.
Pam is in Exeter, New Hampshire, has spent most of your life in New Hampshire. Yeah. Wonderful conversation about the rural parts of New Hampshire and what life is really like
Oh, really?
for a lot of
Right,
folks.
right.
Yeah, dirt roads, and Ray Buckley didn't have plumbing growing up, and
Oh, is that right?
yeah, and that this is not unusual.
Wow.
There are more of us out there. I actually, when I know my in New Hampshire, when I was a baby, I know my mother washed clothes in the creek.
Really? Wow. Wow. Well, this is yeah. I mean, this is sort of nitty gritty about what it was. I remember when I came to Boston, I'd worked for a while at a paper in Maine. I got a job at the Phoenix as a copy editor, and I was editing along one day, and people in the Phoenix were kind of an alternative, left-leaning newspaper, and they were quite a sophisticated crowd, having come
Yes.
from a bunch of other places. And I remember looking up one day, editing a piece, and saying to John Ferguson, who was just kind of my mentor and brilliant guy, saying, "Hey, what is a Cuisinart?" And he
Oh,
looking at me, kind of laughing, and
great.
never letting me forget that, kind of saying, "I remember
So
you came from the Maine woods and you asked me, what is a
with the
Cuisinart?" But
Cuisinart.
I never heard of one before. I'd never
Hey,
heard
at
of one.
least you pronounce it correctly.
Well, it
So
took me some time.
that was that. So we have some lightning round questions we'd like to ask our
But
guests.
can I tell a story about Phillips, about Exeter first, just for one
Oh,
second?
please.
I was there, Pam, with Carrie was speaking there at the school in Phillips Exeter in 2004, and a guy got up and it was a lefty crowd. A guy got up and started asking questions, and he'd say, "And it seems to me that what we really should be doing is impeaching Vice President Cheney," and the crowd all would cheer and clap. And I think we should really go. And then as he goes on a little bit, he's got three rounds of applause. He says, "As Lyndon LaRouche calls for," they all
Oh,
realized they were cheering for LaRouche. All this carry on. I still think about that from time to
I
time.
was just going to tell you a story about how my dad and I went to see Joe Lieberman, whatever, probably around the same
Yeah.
time at Phillips Exeter. And, they're like, okay, we loved it, but they're like, we'll take, questions from the people of the public. And then some guy stands up and he starts saying something and he's like, "And Lyndon LaRouche," and everyone's like, kick him out. And then like the next woman up is like, "But Lyndon LaRouche," and it was like three people they had to kick out. And then, because I remember saying, "Dad, who's Lyndon LaRouche? I have no idea who this person is."
He was, I read quite a bit about him as part of doing something. Can't remember quite what it was, but he had all these theories, and one was redefining the, B flat or C, or I mean, he did a lot of things other than just thinking about kind of crazy world conspiracy things. He had a lot of diverse intellectual interests, none of which I could really talk about in any way, but I was interested to see he was kind of a musicologist in some way. But anyway. So
Oh,
lightning
no.
round questions.
Lightning round questions. The first one is actually back to books. What's a book that changed your life?
Changed my life. All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren, which I read when I was in high school. Such a great book. I'm not a fan of a lot of his work, but I love that book. And the way he wrote about both, it just got me consumed with politics, and the way he wrote about Anne Stanton and the way Jack Burden loves Anne Stanton. You fell in love with Anne Stanton yourself as a reader of that book. You just it was such as a romance, I just love that book. And another one, my favorite novel probably today is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn.
Oh,
Which I love that book. I think it's just so so well done and so, you know, so smart. So, and again, I don't like a lot of Woz stuff, but that was his one serious kind of non-spoof book, and I just really like
It
that
was
book.
exquisite. Yeah.
Those would be two. And I also love Ian McEwan. I love Atonement, although some of his early work, I mean, I say I was reading one of Ian, the Venice book, Ian McEwan,
Oh,
and this is
yeah.
back. I was
Bridge of Sighs? Is that
no,
Ian
I think
McEwan
it's
or is that
called
somebody else?
Comfort. It might have been Comfort. I don't know straight, but it's a book set in Venice. It ends with this horrible, strange, you know, sexual death fantasy. And I had I was riding along the
We don't
back
need
seat of
this.
the car.
Yeah.
A couple of my friends were in the front. The window was open. The car didn't have air conditioning. We're in the back roads in Maine, and the whole thing resolves itself in the last page and a half or so. When I realized what was happening, I threw the book out the window just impulsively. It wasn't a conscious act. I said, and so although some of his work I've hated, I think Atonement is a great book. So there would be three, I guess.
Okay.
Second question. If you had to choose one politician, living or dead, to meet, to have a dinner with, who would it be?
Henry Clay. I'm a big fan of Henry Clay in that he kept the nation together during the utter craziness of the Andrew Jackson years, and was a person who had the American agenda of canals, railroads, and the like. He was a slave owner who knew slavery was wrong and wanted at some point, like a lot of them did, at some point to do something about it. Actually, this is not in any way a justification of slavery, but was someone when his slaves parents were ill, he would let them go and go home to tend out on their parents. He seemed to me to be a remarkable person, to a hugely self-educated, did not go to college, read for the law, was elected Speaker of the House the first day he was in Washington, and became they kept the nation together in the run up to the Civil War. I think he'd be a fascinating person to sit down and talk.
Excellent. And last, what's your favorite vacation spot? You'd be amazed at how people answer this question. Very telling.
Vacation spot. Wow. God, I don't know.
You don't need one. You're in Maine. You're in vacation land.
Yes. I don't. I guess I really couldn't answer that in a way that I would say.
Concord, Massachusetts.
Concord, Massachusetts. Well, that's where I stay at the Phillips Inn there with Franklin. I don't know. I couldn't really give you. I've had an awful lot of fun windsurfing in Bonaire, but if it weren't for the windsurfing, you really wouldn't go. I'm too old to windsurf now. So
well, like I said, the answers are very telling, and yours was too, Scott.
Yeah. I can't really choose.
You can't come up with a spot. I think it's because you're in Maine. I was kidding, but
maybe so. Maybe so.
Because you are actually in vacation land the way life should be. So you don't need a vacation spot. It has been fantastic to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Can I put my book up one more time?
Please put your book up one more time. It's called Just East of Nowhere by Scott Lehigh. Look for it online. Ask for it in your local bookstore.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Scott. Great to have you.
Nice to meet you, Pam.
Have you on. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed meeting him because I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know who he is because I don't read the Globe, but yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, really loved it. Are we having some technical difficulties?
Nope.
Good. Okay.
No. It's time for us to go to Spirit. You ready, Pam?
Yes.
Yeah, I first of all, I loved the way you were so forthcoming about, why you don't read the Globe. And I loved the way that Scott Lehigh responded to you. I thought that was great.
How did he respond? I don't remember what he said. What did he say?
He said that basically your assessment that the Herald is more right-leaning and the Globe is more left-leaning is a fair one. but he also pointed out that the Globe has certainly supported Republicans over the year, Charlie Baker, of course, being the most recent example. And there were a lot of people in Massachusetts who thought that the Globe was a much too supportive of Charlie Baker. So a lot of folks in Massachusetts don't think that the Globe is left-leaning enough.
Yeah. And I think a lot of Republicans don't think that Charlie Baker is an actual Republican.
I think that's probably true.
Boston Globe, we back Charlie Baker. It's like, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Republican light, but sure, whatever.
Yeah. But it's been and also really interesting to hear his thoughts on, the indictment and your thoughts and you sharing how Republicans see it. And that's why we have this show. And I think it was, and I could, Scott Lehigh was really listening to you and really taking that in and understanding what you were saying, which I think is great. One of the reasons I wanted to have him on the show.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely interesting character, right? Like smart guy, great career. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I'll probably every once in a while, pick up the Globe and see what he has to say about politics. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Which is why we do the show. It's always interesting to see someone's opinion about like something you have an opinion about and have it be completely different.
Yes.
But
also, like, he's like us. He's just expressing his opinion. He doesn't care whether you agree with his opinion or not. Doesn't diss you because you have a different opinion. This is what I think. This is how I see it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I was going to jump in at some point in time and I think I forgot or I just missed my window of opportunity. But, people are always like, oh my God, MAGA Republicans, like the worst MAGA Republicans. And I'm like, oh, I'm a MAGA Republican. Like
but you're not though, because you're not voting for Trump again. So I don't think you're not in core MAGA.
7 years, I've been on board, like.
Oh yeah, you count.
But yeah, like I always like, I don't know when people say like MAGA Republicans, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that, do you think it's like people who have lost their minds and like?
I think it means people who it's Trump forever. They will never find fault with him. They will always support him. That's what I think. I think it's like a really hardcore Trump base.
Isn't that okay? That's their choice, right?
Yeah, that's your choice. And I
don't like the like to be like it's so this like negative connotation that MAGA Republicans, like, again, it's their choice. If they want to like go hard for him, they can go hard for him. Like, it's great. Like, you love Joe Biden, you could be a Biden Democrat, like, right?
That's the American way. I get to vote for the candidate I think is best.
Yeah, I just don't like that negative connotation that people try to throw behind it when it's just like, whatever. People do whatever.
Well, that's one of the reasons we're having this podcast is that both of us, we've talked about this. We're both deeply patriotic people, and we recognize that if you're from a different political party and you have a different perspective, you are still our fellow Americans. We are still going to reach out to each other and understand each other and care about each other as fellow Americans. That's what we're supposed to do. So
exactly.
So glad we're doing this.
So this is great.
No, and actually it really is great. So before we go, yes, we did tell you we are going to have former Vice President Mike Pence on the show. We're also going to have former U.S. Rep Mike Capuano on the show and current member of Congress Seth Moulton on the show and other really wonderful guests. Great discussions coming up. We thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe. We're on all podcast platforms. We're on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio. Wherever you find podcasts, that's where you can find Going Disparate. So please subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and follow us on social media, just at Going Disparate on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and email us and let us know what you think at pamandmara@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us, folks.
Thank you. Remember, we are your place for stress-free politics, hot takes on crime, and a place where your political adversary may become your best friend.
Don't forget the truth. See you next time, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.